Hello, Namaste. I welcome you all to Wattwatch India. We keep you updated with the recent developments in Indian energy ecosystem. Now, in previous part 1, we discussed the 2014 Deviation Settlement Mechanism, what were their limitations and what led to introduction of these 2022 regulations. So, in this part, we are going to discuss the CERC Deviation Settlement Mechanism and related matters regulations 2022, which were notified 14th of March 2022. It brought about certain fundamental changes in the way our grid frequency is maintained and managed. Now, the first core principle of this is the system operator, which is the load dispatch center, regional, national, at whichever level. The system operator is solely responsible for managing the grid frequency. I have highlighted the word solely responsible. Under the previous ones, under the 2014 regulations, there was an indirect attempt to maintain the system frequency, manage it through punishments or incentives, right? And then obviously there was some level of support from the system operator as well in maintaining the grid frequency by deployment of ancillary services. But here onwards, the system operator is given the sole responsibility of managing the grid frequencies. All entities are supposed to adhere to their schedule, and deviation will be managed through deployment of ancillary services by the system operator. So with this, we have two tools of control of the frequency. First is a centralized tool of control, which are ancillary services that are deployed centrally by the system operator, right? And then there is a second tool of control, which is the decentralized one, which is the existing system of punishments and incentives to the generators and utilities by frequency linked deviation settlement mechanism. Now we have two modes of control, and having these two modes of control could be counterproductive. How it can be counterproductive? For example, there is a frequency excursion, and there is a drop in frequency of the grid, which indicates that the demand and supply mismatch it's towards that the demand is more and the supply is not enough. So when the frequency goes below 50 hertz, what will be done? The system operator will deploy the ancillary services in order to inject more power to the grid and bring the frequency back to close to the system frequency, which is closer to 50 hertz. At the same time, there could be, due to the frequency linked charges, there could be an attempt by the generators and the utilities. For example, in this case, the frequency has fallen down. The generators may try to support the grid by overgeneration. The buyers may try to support the grid by limiting their drawal, and they will also try to make the maximum out of that incentive that they are going to get by underdrawing in conditions of low frequency. So these two tools are acting at the same time. The centralized one is having a global effect on the grid, whereas the decentralized one is first of all not in direct control of the operator, because some utilities or generators may choose to support the grid. Some may just not choose to do it. Some may just choose to follow their schedule. In addition to that, the local action of the generator or the utility to choose to support the grid are temporal in nature. They are only spatial, only up to a certain extent. So having a centralized tool and decentralized tool all at the same time may not send the correct signals and may be counterproductive. It is having basically an additional layer which is not exactly supporting your cause. So these principles totally envisage that the centralized tool of control, which is the ancillary service deployment through the system operator, will be the only tool that will be used to control the grid frequency. Now, another thing, if we look at the frequency plot of 1st of September 2009, which is prior to these deviation mechanism, we can see the excursions in the frequency, how high and how low they are. But now with improvised and evolved regulations, we can see at the plot of September 2020, the excursions in frequency, the variations over the baseline of 50 are not simply high enough. So earlier, the frequency was an indicative of under or oversupply. Like if the frequency goes down, say 49.2 band, that implies that simply demand is much more and the supply is not enough. And on the as a flip side, if the frequency is on the higher side, that simply indicated that the demand is less but the injection is more. So we were able to gauge it. But now in this narrow band, it is not exactly an indicative of under or oversupply, because in any case frequency is contained within this narrow band of operation. In addition, the price arbitrage scope does not exist anymore. Earlier there was an incentive to draw more power when the frequency is high and draw less power when the frequency was low, and it was related to the frequency. So there was a price arbitrage scope, but now system frequency is in this band, so that scope also simply does not exist. So the 2022 regulation delinked the DSM charges from frequency and linked it to market and the price of deployment of ancillary services, AS. This is a major step, and that really destabilized the grid. We'll discuss how. Now, the dangerous effects of this delinking DSM charges and frequency. Within weeks of introduction of these new regulations, the grid frequency dangerously oscillated between 49.5 and 50.5 Hertz. That is dangerous levels of oscillation. This is primarily because of lack of deterrence. Earlier in 2014 regulation, the penalty was heavily increased during periods of grid stress as frequency moved away from 50 Hz. It used to increase as we moved away from the band of 50 Hz. It used to start at 50.05 and used to continuously increase all the way to the bottom band of the frequency. But now it was not linked to frequency and it was linked to market price. Now I'll give you an example why this is not good. Say your grid frequency is 49.5 Hz. That indicates the frequency is less, the demand is more, supply is less. Now, if an entity chooses to draw more than its scheduled power, that would mean that it is further destabilizing the grid. Now, the penalties were such that as the frequency is so low, the charges of drawing that excess power beyond the schedule at low frequency were very high. But now it is directly linked to the market price. It is not even linked to the frequency. So even at 49.5 Hertz, I can choose to draw more than my schedule just based on the market price. It could be low, it could be high. It is a dynamic system, we all understand. So that removed the earlier deterrence that was there on the overdrawal or under injection of power. So continual overdrawal during low frequency and underdrawal during high frequency as monetary repercussions were not strong enough. In addition, due to this, the system operator, since it was solely responsible, had to deploy ancillary services. Now, ancillary services also contain high cost gas based power stations, which are very costly because LNG is imported also sometimes, and that took away the DSM charges were as high as 40 rupees per kilowatt hour, because now it was linked to the cost of deployment of your ancillary services. Now you can imagine, right, that each unit that someone was deviating from the schedule, they were made to pay rupees 40 per kilowatt hour. What a huge financial blow to the economics of that generator or utility. So due to these things, CERC had to take immediate corrective measures, and it issued an interim order in which it linked the frequency back to DSM charges, and also it capped the DSM charges to rupees 12 per kilowatt hour. So this shows that the idea of delinking these charges and frequency was not, although was a very positively perceived idea, although was a very forward looking idea, but did not directly work on our grid conditions. And due to these, the CERC Deviation Settlement Mechanism 2024 were introduced. Now you can see the previous regulations were introduced in March of 2022, and due to their inability to manage the grid within a short span, on 5th of August 2024, new regulations had to be introduced. Now, what are these regulations? These we'll discuss in the next part of the video. Thank you for tuning in.